So whereas previously, if you wanted to access information, you'd have to go to a library, if you went to a lot of libraries, you still wouldn't have access to all that much information. But if everything got connected, then anyone, anywhere, if you were in sort of a jungle in middle of the Amazon jungle in South America or something, and you had an internet connection, you'd have access to all the world's information. In fact, you'd have access to more information than the US president did in, let's say, 1980. So it'd be pretty incredible and transformative. So I thought, well, I wanted to be part of helping make that happen, and so I decided to put my studies at Stanford on hold, and initially to help the media companies get online, so we had as investors and customers New York Times Company, Hearst, Knight Ridder, and so forth, and that ended up working out. So we sold that company and then created PayPal. And the idea behind PayPal was simply to facilitate payments on the internet. Because at the time, if you bought something from someone, you'd have to mail them a check, and it would take weeks to conduct the transfer. And we figured out how to make it really fast and easy to transfer funds from one person to another. And that actually grew super fast. It grew virally. And the key to that was figuring out how to make the friction of signing up for an account very, very low, and make it easy for one person to refer another. And so as our customer base grew, the actual rate of growth grew. This resulted in some initial challenges in scaling, because we started off with 5 people in customer service. And after 2 months, we had 100,000 customers. So our phone lines exploded, basically. But we were able to overcome those issues. And then eBay bought the company in 2002, and it's sort of grown from there. So what that did, though, was gave me the capital to try to do some things that are fairly high capital, and there were 2 things. There are 2 areas that I really wanted to get into. One was sustainable energy, production and consumption of energy in a sustainable manner, and the other was space exploration. And I started off initially with the idea of doing something in the space exploration arena. In fact, it wasn't actually with the idea of creating a company. It was initially with the thought of spurring interest in sending people to Mars. So I put together this idea called Mars Oasis, which was to send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars and get people excited about the idea of going there, and thus increase NASA's budget in order to make it happen. As I got more and more into that, I discovered that the real issue was that the cost of space transportation was really high, in fact, and it was getting worse. So we're used to technology getting better every year, but in some arenas it actually does not. It gets worse, particularly when you consider that in 1969 we were able to go to the moon, and then we were unable to go beyond low Earth orbit. And now with the space shuttle retired, we're not even able to go to Earth orbit at all, even with people. So that's, that was not the right trajectory. So I actually went to Russia 3 times to look at buying an ICBM to launch this mission. Just very crazy.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so after my 3rd trip of trying to negotiate with the Russians to buy an ICBM, and I did actually get a deal, so figured out what it would cost and everything. But I concluded that my initial assumption had been wrong, that it was not a question of trying to generate more will to explore, because I think the United States in particular is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. Space exploration is fundamental to the American psyche. So, but people really need to believe that it can be done, and it's not going to break the bank if it does. So that's when I decided to start a rocket company. And I actually didn't think it would succeed, and it almost didn't. So we started off developing a small rocket, which was kind of a scale model version. It was about 100,000 pounds of thrust, so big, big by normal standards, but small for a rocket. And developed the engine and the airframe and the electronics and the guidance control system, and then proceeded to have 3 failed launches in a row. And so for various technical reasons, the first 3 launches did not succeed in reaching orbit. Launches 2 and 3 did get to space, but they didn't achieve enough speed to reach orbital velocity. So this is 2008, and so we're heading into the recession, and we had 1 rocket left, and unfortunately in late 2008 that 4th launch did work, and we made it to orbit, and then we won a NASA contract after that, and so fortunately things worked out. But if that 4th launch had not worked, then SpaceX wouldn't be around. So it was a very close call. In fact, when I started, I thought, okay, I've got enough money. I think I've got enough money for 3 launches. Unfortunately, it was just enough to make that 4th one. So in parallel, there was Tesla, and the impetus for Tesla was really to create a compelling electric car. And at first, I thought there would not really be a need for such a thing because. I don't know if people are aware of this, but GM at the time, but when California changed its regulations, they actually, GM recalled all the EV1s and then crushed them so that they could never be returned. So it was clear that if a startup company did not create an electric vehicle and show that it's possible to have an electric car that looks good, goes fast, has long range, and that if you created such a thing that people would buy it, then it would be a very long time before the large incumbents did so. And so that was I felt it was important that we create Tesla for that reason. And Tesla also almost died in 2008. And as you recall, the recession was particularly difficult for car companies. And right as in the summer of 2008, we had to raise a big funding round. But because of the collapse in the financial system, that funding round didn't happen, and we had to piece together the money to keep the company going from myself and existing investors, and we were able to just complete a financing round that was just barely enough to keep the company going, and we closed it on the last hour of the last day that it was possible to do so. It was Christmas Eve. 2008, 6 p.m. And after that, the investors would have they were going on vacation, wouldn't have been possible to bring them back to the table, and we would have run out of money a few days after Christmas. So that was also a close call. So while things are going really well these days, I think it's always important to remember that when you're creating a company, there are very dark times. Those dark times, that's the difference between success and failure. Of course, now things are actually going pretty well for Tesla. May they stay that way. And also for SpaceX, we've got the Model S, which is in production, and it was like Consumer Reports gave it a 99 out of 100, which is actually the highest score that Consumer Reports has ever given a car of any kind. Was given to the Model S. And then when the federal government did the safety tests, it actually also got the highest safety rating of any car ever, including minivans and SUVs, so for a sedan. And anyway, so that's going pretty well, and we're actually exporting a lot of the cars to Europe currently, and then we'll start exporting to Asia. And it's funny because I was wondering, like, we got these incredibly good rates for shipping goods to China because all these container ships come in full and they go back empty. So it's real cheap to ship things to China. So we'll start doing that in first quarter. And then with SpaceX, we've got a launch coming up, which is our next generation rocket. Because the key thing for rocketry, the key breakthrough that's needed is to create a fully reusable rocket. Because I think what SpaceX has done thus far is evolutionary, but not revolutionary. In order for that to occur, you have to bring the rocket back to the launch pad and be able to relaunch it again. And just like it has to be reusable much in the way that an airplane or a car or any other mode of transport is reusable. So that's kind of the holy grail goal of space flight, which we're hoping to make progress towards. But it's very risky. So there's a good chance that the upcoming launch could go wrong. It's currently slated for the end of this month, and hopefully that goes well. It's always a tricky thing with the rocket business because you can't issue a recall or send a software patch or anything. After the rocket lifts off, 9 minutes later, it's either in orbit or it's exploded. So, yeah, it's nervous 9 minutes. All right, so with those introductory remarks, let's just go to Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Big proponent of an electric vehicle tax credit to help with the EV1, oh, not the EV1, I mean the Volt, and then Nissan was also a big proponent of that. So that they have a lot more influence than Tesla did, certainly. So, but we were able to kind of go with them in that direction, maybe add a little bit to the influence on that front. And then on the space side, we've been arguing for a greater share of that more of space should be commercial, and I think there's been some success in that direction. Although it's still a very small part of the NASA budget. It's maybe I think 7 or 8% of the NASA budget. So it's still fairly small. So I wouldn't say we've been particularly successful in influencing policy, but we have taken note of what general policy directions are happening, and then trying to go along with those. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'll ask the first question, then we can open it up. You had said something which is very interesting and true. That is every business starting up reaches a point where
I think so when you create a company, I mean, if you think, well, what is a company really? A company is a group of people gathered together to create a product or service, and that's really all a company is. And so you have to really believe in what you're creating, and that it's and know in your heart and mind that this is something that matters, that and that the world ought to have. And I think it's important to investors to show that you're all in. And I think, for example, with Tesla, the fact that I invested all the money I had, literally I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent in 2008. The fact that I was all in, I think, made a huge difference to the investors, to convince them to invest in Tesla at the same time that say GM and Chrysler were going bankrupt. Yeah, I think you have to show that you really care. Like it's like that you've got skin in the game, and that you've given it everything that you've got, and then the other people at the company will follow suit, as will investors. I think that's really important. Yeah, I did that at both SpaceX and Tesla. I think that's really fundamental. And then when you hire people, or really what you're trying to, when you hire people, that just means you're convincing people to join you in the endeavor. You should hire people that are also passionate about what you're doing. So it's not just that they're not just there for the salary. They really need to care about what they're doing, and then they will stay during the dark times.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Elon. While we're waiting for the next question, I just seen your 5 sons in the front row reminds me